So I think, again, it just goes back to being very thoughtful about your intent and knowing and having an action plan for, hey, if this doesn't come through, am I prepared to move this forward?
Yeah.
And as an investor, we're in business to make money. Every business out there exists to make money, right? We got to acknowledge that fact and deal with it. And we want to make sure as investors that if you say you're going to do it, that you honor what you commit to.
Yeah.
And if you can't, and the only reason I couldn't move it is because I didn't follow the formula. Even with the 2 weeks I had left, I couldn't sell it because I didn't follow the investment formula. Just making sure that your seller is comfortable, but also aware. And I think that's an important thing, is to know both sides of it. My recommendation is to make sure you talk to a real estate attorney, no matter what. Make sure your broker's talking to the real estate, make sure the title attorney's talking. So that everybody is clear and whatever language is used is appropriate for that particular contract and situation.
Welcome to another REI-NWA Podcast. My name is Coley Bailey. I'm your host, and I'm an executive broker and team leader at the Lone Rock team at Fathom Realty. And today, this is going to be episode 29. We're talking about how to win with wholesaling. And I have my new good friend, Latonya Jackson.
Nice to meet you.
Yes.
So excited to be here today.
Yes, I'm glad to have you here. I got to say, this is a topic that in the state of Arkansas has a lot of controversy. I was a little concerned about how to go into this one. We've had a discussion before. I've looked up some of the best practices on this from the Arkansas Real Estate Commission.
Yes.
And so we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into this today. But before we get into all this too deep, I want to learn more about you and where you're from and what what got you into this, and what you're doing day to day and how you got into your company. So and by the way, your investment company is Limitless Legacy.
Yes.
I love that. That is such a great name.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's all about restoring dignity and helping to leave generational legacies and preserve them for families. And so I don't do this to get in trouble with anybody or to try to take advantage of anyone, right? I follow the numbers, I follow the formula. And how I got started is I would watch shows on, HGTV. I'm probably like most people.
Right.
And I would try to figure it out. I love numbers. I'm a math girl. And so I was calculating. I'm like, these numbers don't add up. They never added up to me. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Somebody's got to explain to me. Surely there's a formula, right? Of course, it was many years later before I actually pulled the trigger to go learn the information. I didn't Google it, sorry, which is what I tell all my students. Go Google it and look it up. But it took a while, and then I found an organization that I value in the Women's Real Estate Investment Network, and I learned. I took a $17 class, and I just kind of watched their 1 week long training and took some notes, and I actually found my first property during that class, but I didn't pull the trigger because I was scared. And so I had the numbers, everything made sense, but I was like, I'm not sure about that. So it was probably that was in 2021. It was another year before I set up Limitless Legacy, and another few months before I got my first deal under contract, which was a wholesale contract. So
Cool. Fantastic. Where are you from?
Oh, that's always a loaded question.
Okay.
I am a military child.
Okay.
So when someone asks me where I'm from, I'm like, what do you mean? Where did I go to high school? So because I'm a military brat, sorry for all of those out there, I try to find new words, but it's just what it is. I was born in the state of Mississippi, actually, and but I've lived in the Philippines, Texas, Nebraska. So when I moved to Arkansas, I actually moved here from Nebraska, which is where I went to undergrad. And so
I'm a little bit jealous. That's pretty cool to have all that worldview.
Yes, I loved it. It shaped who I am and what I do.
Absolutely. Before we really get too far into this, this episode deserves its own disclaimer. I am not an attorney.
I am not an attorney.
Right. We are not attorneys. You do need to check with your own attorneys when drafting contracts and creating these agreements.
Yes.
Particularly within wholesale. All right. So, Latonya, with wholesaling in Arkansas, there are a lot of other states where they don't really have any regulations. The authorities haven't really made any statements about this. In Arkansas, they have. So our real estate commission really looks at wholesaling and questions, is this an unlicensed practice of real estate? So there are several different metrics that, they're looking at, several different boxes that if they are checked, they're going to think that this is an unlicensed practicing of real estate. And by the way, just so everyone knows why I had some trepidation with this, that unlicensed real estate activity is a violation of Arkansas real estate license law, and it is a Class D felony pursuant to ACA 17-42-105. That's where it is in Arkansas code. And just in case anybody is curious about that. Within this best practices statement that I got, it's very clear that the main concern is protecting the public.
Right.
It's making sure that any dealings that we have are fair and open, and that the counterparty understands what's going on throughout the whole transaction. And there are a few things that are red flags. Mm-hmm. So, one could be that sellers thought they had a legitimate offer on their property from a buyer whose intent was to purchase the property, and they weren't aware that it was contingent on another buyer coming in and getting that contract from them. That's a red flag for the Arkansas Real Estate Commission. Another big one is if the person acting as a buyer doesn't have the intent or the ability to actually follow through and actually close on the property. That's probably the biggest of the red flags. So I won't go through this whole thing. If anybody's curious about this, you can put a message down below, send me a carrier pigeon, email me, whatever. I'll get you a copy of this because I think it's pretty important.
Yes.
That people are aware of this. I want to throw it to you now. How do you look at staying on the right side of these regulations and doing it correctly?
Yeah, so I think it's very important to go with, think about item number one. What is, or maybe it was number two. No, your intent. What is your intent with the property, right? When I go into a deal, I'm looking at, okay, if I can't wholesale it, do I want to flip this property? Mm-hmm. So before I even ever make an offer, I've made a decision that if I'm not able to wholesale the property, that I'm going to flip it, right? I already have another strategy in play.
And by flip it, you mean you're going to purchase it, you're going to renovate
fix it up,
then
and
you're
then
going to sell it.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. Not just flipping the paper.
Right, not just flipping the paper, right? But ideally, I don't want to do the work. That's really why I'm let's just be honest. That renovation stuff it's a lot.
It's hard.
It's hard work. And, and if contractors walk out on you or you find something that you didn't find in the inspection because maybe the inspector didn't do as thorough a job as you thought, there's so many reasons why before I ever decide to make a flip. But I count the cost before I ever make that offer, right? Yeah. I looked at a property this weekend and I spent a lot of time over the last 24 to 48 hours before I decided if I'm going to make an offer on it or not. Mm-hmm. And part of that was, well, if I don't move this in the way, then am I ready to flip it? And it's are my numbers accurate? Do they reflect? And so you really have to, one, know what your exit strategy is up front and know that your intent is to buy the property outright and do something with it one way or the other. Whether it's, okay, well, if I'm not able to wholesale or flip this paper, I am going to fix and flip it because it does need work, right? Because when we're wholesaling, we're looking for distressed properties. Right. We're not necessarily looking at a house that is ready for retail market. We're looking at off market. And why is it off market? There's some violation in many cases, or there's some codes that need to be fixed. This house had a code violation that I looked at this weekend, right? So I have to take all of that into consideration and go, do I have enough experience to be able to manage this flip if that's what happens? Or am I comfortable enough to get the property under contract because I am familiar with real estate investing and know what can happen? And then go to the right buyer who's ready to flip. Most ideally, my client in a wholesale deal is a flipper because that's who's going to best be suited for that property.
Right. So one of the key takeaways that I got from this is that maybe the right way to do this is you find properties, you go ahead and close on them.
Yes.
And then if you have another buyer who's going to buy it from you, I mean, they could do it later,
Yes.
the next day or whatever. But having the ability to actually close, and whether that's hard money, whether that's a partnership,
Yep.
those different things.
Yeah, double close or transactional is transactional funding, right? Getting the resources and knowing that you have them to be able to close. And there are funders out there who will do transactional lending. What that means is that you have to provide them, I'm going to buy the property and I'm going to close on it on X day, and then tomorrow or later today, I'm going to sell it. As long as your intent maintains that you're going to close on that property, you're in good standing with AREC and everybody else, or REC. What are we saying here?
I say AREC.
AREC. All
I
right.
say AREC.
I'm an acronym girl, so I'm like, how are we pronouncing this? Okay. I would call it CARE because you just move the letters around, right? Let's just be all about caring about for people. But nevertheless, you want to, so there are transactional funders who will help you do a double close where you can close on, X day and then the next day or a week or whenever is appropriate for you. I just say don't get caught with that payment if you didn't intend to pay it, right? Because there's that.
Right.
But being able to do that, and that allows you then to honor the intent that you hopefully started with.
Right.
And then, and if for some reason something doesn't happen, then you have some time to go find a hard money lender or a private money lender or, gap funding or whatever it is that you might need to be, not gap funding, whatever funding you might need to be able to get out of that transactional situation and move it forward. Mm-hmm. I always recommend having the approach that we take is always having that lender ready in our like, hey, here's all the numbers, here's everything, where are we going to be if we are not able to move this forward, mm-hmm. right? And that happened on our last property. We were intending to close on it and we had a buyer ready to go, mm-hmm. and they backed out 2 weeks before close, mm-hmm. and it was Thanksgiving. And so thankfully we had an alternative plan. I'm like, hey, here's what we're going to do. I had a lender lined up. That lender was more expensive, but I went and found another one that could work my numbers with me. And then I got a gap funder to help with some things because I just didn't have those resources. I had used them elsewhere, mm-hmm.
Thinking
that I had this as a wholesale deal. So
right.
I was not prepared for that, but it all worked out. The private money lender brought the funds, the hard money lender, and we purchased the property, we flipped it, and it's on the market today. So I think, again, it just goes back to being very thoughtful about your intent, yeah. and knowing and having an action plan for, hey, if this doesn't come through, am I prepared to move this forward?
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that we talked about before filming today is that wholesaling is often touted as the way to get into real estate with no money down.
Yes.
And as a newbie, it's the first thing you should jump into doing. And really, it's a more advanced strategy than a lot of those coaches or gurus might be given it credit for. And I think, at least in Arkansas, and with AREC on everybody's, breathing down everybody's neck, I think it puts some of those newbies in a little bit of a bad position,
yes.
to jump right into that. Because, yeah, I think having the ability to actually close on it is one of those things that erases a red flag for AREC. So it's really important here, having the ability to do that. And then the other thing is that it's not a problem until it's a problem, right? So there's probably deals that are going on that fall apart and people just move on. When there's somebody who was depending on you to close and it really affects their life, mm-hmm. as a wholesaler, you came up and you said, hey, I can solve this problem for you. I can take this property off your hands and, we'll do it fast. We'll close. No repairs, no nothing. And it seems like a godsend for these people.
Yes.
And then you didn't have the back end buyer, you didn't have your stuff together, you didn't know how to get other types of lending because maybe you're just starting and you don't have all those connections and you haven't actually pieced this puzzle together for your own business, and now you're failing that person. That's where the problem comes in.
Yeah, and I had an experience. Thankfully, it wasn't in Arkansas, so AREC, do not call me. But I had a property over in Missouri, and these were dear friends of ours. They happen to live in Arkansas, which is how we learned. And I had a conversation, and they were like, hey, are you still doing? I was like, well, can I make an offer on your house, on that particular piece of property? And we did, and they went with us. And And then life happened. My stepmother passed away unexpectedly. And then, and we were in the middle of buying our own house. And there was just a lot of things going on. My intent was to sell that house for them. They were as close to family, family friends as you can get.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't, and at that point I thought, I've got a good reason to get out. Right here, when my stepmom passed, we had to fly out to Maryland, help my dad with everything. And then I got a buyer. And so I thought, oh, the Lord is good. Okay. So I get this person. They have a great story about why that property would be a great fit for them. They had the resources, because I always require my end buyers to provide proof of funds before I'll do business with them.
Yeah.
And so, they had the proof of funds. They had everything in place. And this was not a proof of funds that you can go out and get on one of the websites. This was, I want a letter from your bank kind of proof of funds that you have it. And so they had everything, right? And we signed a contractual agreement. And then the buyer's ex-husband, father of their children, had a heart attack and passes away. So now we've had my situation and then their situation, and all of our intent is good. And I said, do you still want to move forward? And the buyer said yes. So now we're still moving forward in good faith. We had the seller talk to their lender, all of the things. They had the cash, but they didn't want to use their cash. You know how we investors are sometimes. We want to leverage other people's money. And so we had the seller, which I thought was weird. I was like, I'm not sure about that, but I had the seller talk to the lender. They were good. We were good. And then the buyer decided that they didn't want to agree or align to the terms of the contract. And now, we pushed closing out because of all the deaths and the changes and all the things. And then, we were supposed to close November 30th, right? So we got to get through Thanksgiving. We were going to close November 30th of that particular year. And the buyer wouldn't sign. The lender assured me that they were going to sign after we had all these conversations, and the buyer wouldn't sign. And the buyer came back and said, so this is a note to all of us investors out here. Don't be cantankerous and don't do things like this, right? They said, well, I'll sign if you remove this, because what I did was I put a stipulation in there that says, if you don't follow through, you have to pay this seller. Our intent is not to put a seller in a situation, but it's like, hey, and they were using that property as a short-term rental. So it's like they've canceled all the contracts at this point because there's going to be a new buyer and all these things. You have to pay for that. Put some skin in the game, so that if you happen to walk away, which we weren't expecting to happen, but if you do, they at least make some money off of this deal, right? Yeah. And the person wouldn't sign because they didn't want to, they wanted another 2 weeks in order to agree to that, even though it was in the original contract. And so it's things like that. Like after that experience, even for myself, we had to walk away. That hurt the relationship with my dear friends. At that particular point, they never want to do business with real estate investors. They never want, and we had a realtor involved. All of the things, but I just said, your strategy going forward needs to be a traditional real estate deal. Go talk to a realtor. Here's someone I found in the journey, because I had questions about that state because I don't live there. Yeah. And so I had to have a realtor in my team, if you will, to help me navigate those waters and make sure we weren't doing anything illegal, make sure we were following all the guidelines, working with the title company and the title attorney to ensure that everything is on the up and up. And everything was. I had that buyer pay the escrow to the title company. Don't give me the money, right? Yeah. And that way, when things fell through, the check came straight from the title company to that seller. And then anything else that was left over, we got, right, to cover the cost for the inspection, because we paid for that, to cover the cost for, any of our out-of-pocket costs. And so what I would say is, you really want to know, and the reason we couldn't move it after that, right? The seller was still open, right? And this was a situation where they really needed to sell this property. And if they would have let me, there's many times over, it's still out there, unfortunately. They needed the resources. And my intent was to sell it, and I still want to sell it. But they won't work with an investor. They don't want to. And so, it's one of those situations where I can't help them unless I just choose to throw, if I give you the referral and just say, hey, here's somebody who needs to sell their home, right? But then I don't make any money. And as an investor, we're in business to make money. Every business out there exists to make money, right? We got to acknowledge that fact and deal with it. Again, the purpose of my company. I'm not here to try to destroy someone's dignity. I'm not here to take away their livelihood. I want them to preserve their legacy. And so anything that we can do to help them is what we should be doing. Yeah. And that's finding the right buyer for their property. And hopefully everybody's dealing in integrity, which we unfortunately found out wasn't the case. And that was my first wholesale experience. and it didn't go well. But I say I still made money. They still got money, and they had to make some tough decisions after that. But anytime I bring it up, it's a sore space for them,
Yeah.
still today. And so, to the degree that we can, we want to make sure as investors that if you say you're going to do it, that you honor what you commit to.
Yeah.
And if you can't, and the only reason I couldn't move it is because I didn't follow the formula. Because had I followed the formula, instead of saying, these are my friends and I love them and I want to help maximize their dollars, I couldn't move the property thereafter. Even with the 2 weeks I had left, I
Yeah.
couldn't sell it because I didn't follow the investment formula.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, it's important to know those numbers going in.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a story that is going to bring a lot of education to a lot of people.
I hope so.
And I know that wasn't easy for you to tell, and I really appreciate you for going into that in the depth that you did. Let's talk about the process, and particularly what we are thinking is the right process here in Arkansas. Are you using realtors? Are you using a licensed real estate agent when you're doing your deals, like when you're going under contract on these deals sometimes?
It depends. Like in the one example I just shared with you all, my first experience with a wholesale deal, I did not. Now, I did have an attorney review the contract to make sure that we were legally good. And again, you heard me talk about the title attorney. So I think there's, it's important to have both in your
Right.
saying, hey, I have this contract, I got it online or I found it somewhere, and I use a local attorney to review it, a real estate attorney. And so I think it's important, and I think it's important on both sides, because if I'm working directly with the seller, as the buyer in this case, then you want to make sure everybody. And so giving that disclaimer up front, I think, is extremely important. That, hey, I have partners, I have individuals who may want to buy this property instead of me being the end buyer. Are you okay with that? Are you comfortable with that? Because if not, I'm still willing to buy the property from you direct, and then we do the double close, right? So just making sure that your seller is comfortable, but also aware. And I think it's important to do that. And so in my contract, it very clearly states, like, I'm not a realtor, but this is a contract that I use. If you prefer, we go to the title company and we can have them draw something up and use that as opposed to what I may have provided, even though it's been reviewed by an attorney. So I think that's important. Now, on other deals, I do use real estate agents. So,
and I think that may give you an added level of protection, especially in
Yes.
Arkansas, because we do have the Arkansas Realtors Association contracts that
Yes.
we use. One of the provisions that's in that contract, section
24.
24, section 24, it is the non-assignment
Yes.
clause. So you're not allowed to assign that contract to another buyer. If you go that route, you're definitely doing a double close.
Yes.
Yep.
And I learned this actually on one of the properties that I flipped, because again, I think it was this last property, may have been the one before, but we were looking at assigning it, right? And then I'm reading the contract, it's a standard contract. I've seen it a million times. I bought in houses here, all the things. And then I see this, like, which is why I know it's section 24. And so I'm reading it and I go, wait a minute, pause. This says you cannot assign. Oh my goodness, are we legally right? And I start freaking out because I want to be integral. And I think that's important in doing business. And so I read it. So we called the broker, we called our real estate agent, who we actually added real estate agent on this particular deal. And I said, hey, did you know it says this on here? And we're trying to assign this and all the things. And she was like, oh my goodness, right? And so then she talks to her broker and we have a conversation, and he says to me, hey, here's what we can do going forward, right? In this case, we had to do a general addendum, right, to amend the original contract and make sure that the language is clear. And of course, that starts to raise red flags for your seller, because they're thinking, what's going on? What's happening? Now, thankfully, everybody was in great communication, because sometimes that's not the case. But in this, thankfully, we had a really good real estate team on both sides that were having conversations and talking with one another about what this means, what it is. And I will tell you, there's many realtors who don't understand the investment side of real estate. So sometimes it's educating the realtor, and I'm happy to do that if they're helping me, right?
Yeah.
Educating them on what this is, what we're looking to do, why we're doing it this way. Title companies, same thing. I try to pick the one that is most investor friendly, but not every branch of a title company understands investments, right? So you really have to be prepared to educate a lot of people in the process. And then once you do, you may find, like, okay, so they go talk to their attorneys and we all get on the same page. So literally we had like a call with our broker, our real estate agent's broker, and then they had a call with the broker for the seller, and everybody got on the same page, and then we amended the general addendum. So I think when I'm working just one-to-one directly with the seller, I'm as honest as I am when I'm working with the real estate agent. And I think that's an important thing, is to know both sides of it. And that particular broker said to us that we should in the future list our company name and or assigns. And then I went and did some research, because I'm a researcher, and there was lots of other examples out on the World Wide Web of data and information that gives us that same kind of language. But my recommendation is to make sure you talk to a real estate attorney, no matter what. Talk to that real estate attorney.
Absolutely.
Make sure your broker's talking to the real estate, like make sure the title attorney's talking. I mean, so that everybody is clear, and whatever language is used is appropriate for that particular contract and situation. So I think you absolutely, realtors can do this, you know, with and partner. I love working with my realtors. Like, we have a few that we've worked with on deals, and I love working with them. One, because I don't have to deal with all the paperwork, and I don't have to answer all those questions, and that's why I'm happy to educate. One realtor we worked with down in Fort Smith, she is an investor, so that made it so much easier. She was actually educating us on things that we didn't know about that particular environment down there. And so I think it's important for realtors and buyers, investors, everyone in the game to be educated about what we're doing, why someone would do that, and what that process looks like, so that it's right from the start. When that contract gets presented to the seller, it has all the language and all the appropriate things, and we don't have to go back and forth with that. We almost lost the whole entire property because of it. Because of the questions and things. But again, thankfully, when you have the right team, the team that gets educated, they're willing to go do that work and research, it helps everyone be on the same page.
Wow. So we've covered a lot here. Like I said, I had trepidation going into this conversation.
How do you feel about it now?
I'm feeling okay about
All right. I did my job then.
Still not being an attorney.
I am not a financial advisor. I am not an attorney. Any of this information that we are sharing with you, you should go do your own due diligence and perform that with your legal team.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That being said, we are having a Rookie Nook. Yes, in April. It's going to be on the 25th of April. It's going to be at the Whole Hog Cafe in Fayetteville. Doors will open at 5:30 like they always do. We'll get started around 6. We'll get some networking in, and you'll get to hear Latonya going further into some of these stories, and a little bit of Q&A, the classic networking that we're known for. So definitely come on out to this Rookie Nook. We'd love to see you there. And with that, wow, I think this was a really good episode.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for coming out. This was really good. All right, guys, thanks for watching this one. We'll catch you on the next one.